Tigertail, for whom Jay sent yesterday, has gone for his mother, so the messenger reports. APL 1. Disappointed by Abram, he should have been here on the 27th. Set out for Tampa Bay, ordered the Marines. Tompkins Artillery and Major Graham's battalion down. Came to Fort Foster for the night, departed thence on the 2nd. Met the train going up, stopped a short time at the Little Hillsborough selected ground for the encampment of the troops. Arrived at Tampa, dined with Captain Crabb. Had a conference with Cloud. 3. John Hoponi, Tostoni Harjo came to see me with Cloud. They dined with me, wrecked a report from Major Childs, stating the arrival of Abraham. Requested that he be sent forward. Wrecked a report of the capture of John Hicks and his party west of the Sewanee. Directed the reserves to New Orleans. Wrecked an order from the Adjutant General to return the dredge boat, reported that it had been done in March. Directed that a relay of expresses should be established by the Q Masters Department, and ordered horses to mount a part of Major McClintock's command. Directed horses to Volusia for the dragoons. Wrecked a letter from the third auditor of the 13th of March containing a statement of the amount, in which a receipt of Major McKay for $231 had been omitted, wrote to Major Cross on the subject. 4. Sent Lieutenant Lurrell to Fort Mitchell for public papers, sent my serve with him for my baggage. Sent him also for funds for the Indian service. Informed Lieutenant Colonel Harney that horses would be sent to part of his COMD. Wrote to Lieutenant Harris acknowledging his letter, stating the deports he had under. Holati Maiko, the Pease Creek chief, came in today to see me. Part of his people are in the neighborhood. Jim Boy has heard of the state of the affairs in Alabama, came to see me on the subject, remained the whole afternoon and prevented me from doing any business. He is a tiresome fellow, but may be made useful. April 5th. Holati Miko came today with Echo Harjo, they are relatives. He is for peace but not for emigration. Cloud came also, he is a fool, but a very brave man. William, a cousin of Micanopy, with several of Halatucci's men came in today for provisions. They report that chief on the way with a number of his people. Micanopy sent in for provisions, he will probably be here tomorrow. April 6th. Great difficulties in consequence of the improper conduct of citizens at the fort. Martial law may be necessary. All citizens prohibited from crossing the Hillsborough without permission. Several citizens have stolen horses and started towards Fort Drane, ordered that they be stopped and sent back. They are discharged. Alabama drafts. Micanopy visited General J. in company with Coacucci, the eldest son of Philip. The latter states that his father, Coy Harjo, Abiesha Tuskinsa and others, will come in with their people. They wish to take their cattle to Volusia. Found great difficulty with the Indians they apprehend being robbed of their Negroes. Have agreed to take their cattle at Volusia, but find some difficulty in arranging the price. April 7th. General J had a camp conference with Micanopy and Coacucci. John Hoponi came in, dined with them, and remained all night. He exerted himself to impress upon them the necessity for immediate action, the promise to exert themselves to bring their people in. 8. Halatucci came today. GLJ made an arrangement with the chiefs to surrender all the Negroes taken in the war. They are to be delivered on the St. John's to one of the commanding officers. Agreed to take Philip's cattle at Fort Milton. Coacucci left today for his people, promised to send Powell to GLJ. Heard that Echo E. Mathla was on his way with his own people and over 100 Mikazukis. Micanopy left this evening for his camp. He has issued his orders to the whole nation to join him, prepared to move. 9th. Cap Delignel reported today. He says large trails have been discovered bearing to the south. They are the trails of men, women, children, and ponies. They are evidently coming down to join Micanopy. 10th. Directed a survey of the road to Fort Dade. in order to comply with the Secretary of War in relation to the topography of the country. 11th. Wrecked communications from Lieutenant Colonel Crane, Major McClintock, Major, and the Secretary of War wrote to the sectee on the subject of the outrages committed on the Creek families in Alabama. April 12th. Micanopy, Holatuchi, Holati Maiko, and Cloud visited General J. He had a talk with them, arranged with Holatuchi to go himself for his people who are out. Wrecked a part of the Indian cattle. He took leave of Gel J as did Micanopy. Wrote to the adjutant GL. Sent the proceedings of the GL. Court-martial. 13. Furnished various articles for Charlie Emathle's family. Conversed with John Hoponi, gave him a horse. Wrote to Gel Hernandez, Lieutenant Colonel Crane, and the Honorable W. Battle late Sessi of War ad interim. 14. Holati Maiko took leave of me to join Micanopy in camp. John Kowaya set out to collect his people and cattle. The principal Creek chief visited GLJ while conversing with them. Some Tallahassee Indians who had been at Fort Dade came in and reported that their party was on their way to join Micanopy Powell's brother-in-law visited GLJ. He said Powell was on his way to join Philip and would come in. A messenger came from Coaharjo and Tuscania. These chiefs will be in tomorrow with Micanopy. April 15th. Received word the Indians did not come in as they promised. Saw Major Graham and Captain Page on the subject of the emigration. Both those gentlemen consider the Indians sincere. They have been many years among them and know them well. Wrote to General Armistead and directed an examination of Panisofsky Swamp, also of the Withlacoochee above Fort Dade, and directed that all cattle be driven in or destroyed. Tuscania visited General J. Today his talk was not satisfactory. He says his people are in favor of peace but they cannot be collected. April 16th. Authorized Lieutenant Colonel Crane to appoint sutlers at the several forts under his command, also to direct the Ast. Q Master to furnish transportation for their stores. Captain de Lagnell stating that no other than public transportation could be had. Cloud called to see me. A son of a late Tallahassee chief accompanied him. He reports that the Tallahassees are on the route coming in. Jim Boy and Yarjo called Micanopy and Coy Harjo have disappointed me. They were to have been here today, but have failed to come. Major Graham and Captain Page visited Micanopy's camp today. They returned and reported to me that the chiefs would visit me tomorrow. April 17th. The birthday of General J. Eldest daughter wrote to her today. Wrecked dispatches from Lieutenant Colonel Harney. He reports that several Indians had visited for melon, that they would drive in cattle, and that the soldier of General Hernandez's command had been killed. Not by the Seminoles, by the Creek Saruchis. Coy Harjo visited General J. Today he says he was a party to the Treaty of Payne's landing in of Fort Gibson, that he had seen the country west of the Mississippi, was pleased with it, and desired to remove to it. He was opposed to the war, but when Charlie Emathla was killed he was compelled to withdraw to the head of the St. John's to avoid a similar fate. 18th. Micanopy visited General J. Accompanied by Abraham. He is evidently sincere in his intentions to execute the treaty. In good faith, it is doubtful whether he can control his people so far as to induce them, or even a majority of them, to go to the west. He promised to have an emigrating party in readiness as soon as the Indian Negroes arrive. Georges, a nephew of Cloud, who had been sent out by Micanopy and Cloud to order in and hasten the movements of the Indians, and in a report last night he says Jumper, Alligator, and Tiger Tail are on their way with their respective bands, and will be in on the 19th or 20th. A report was RECD. from Major Zanzinger stating that rations had been issued to Eufaula Harjo's party of 55 persons. A.W. Norman brought letters to General J. from Gov. Call and G.L. Reed. He proposes to establish manual labor schools and has it in contemplation to write a history of the Seminole War. Also a poem having for its subject the massacre of Major Dade and his command. Made arrangements to send off a chief and several warriors of the Creek Regiment to their families, in order to attend to the business necessary to be arranged before their departure for the West. April 19th. George, Cloud's nephew, called to see G.L. J. He is engaged in tracing a report to certain white men that G.L. J. intended to deceive the Indians. Sent off the chief and warriors selected to go to Mobile Point. Tustanuk Harjo called to take leave before going to his camp. Introduced W. Norman to several officers and authorized him to go into the interior. The cattle received from the Indians reported to have gone off last night directed that they be pursued this morning. Alligator called with 2 subchiefs and several of his men and reported that Jumper was in the neighborhood and would visit me tomorrow. He spoke of reports in circulation which had an injurious effect on the Indians and caused them to doubt our good faith. 20. Alligator is still here. He brought his daughter to see me and asked a bottle of wine for her. She is an ugly, disgusting-looking squaw, excessively dirty, and constantly scratching her head and spitting on the floor. 12th Street. Jumper, Micanopy and Cloud, with several sub-chiefs, came in. Jumper's daughter with her husband came to see GLJ. Jumper informed GLJ that he would have all the people of the nation brought in. He remarked that Micanopy had given the necessary orders and that they would be obeyed. But he added the Indians are cautious and slow, and many of them were apprehensive of being punished. April 22nd. Micanopy visited GLJ in the morning on the subject of the subsistence of his men. That matter was satisfactorily arranged, and he took his departure for his camp. Jumper came in at dinner. His object was to visit the steamboat in the harbor. He and Alligator went on board with several officers. The chiefs returned greatly pleased. Jumper left GLJ at dark. About midnight, Lieutenant Chambers called awake General J and reported that the Seminole Negroes had attempted to steal some of our wagon horses. They were detected, but fled and escaped. The horses were secured, and the belt of one of the thieves found. Several Indians and Negroes applied today to go within the pickets. 23rd. Jumper is in today. Cloud and Abram also. General J informed Abram that the Negro whose belt had been found must be punished. He promised that it should be done. Robert, an influential Negro chief, came in. He could or would give but little information in relation to the Negroes and Indians. In consequence of difficulties north of Fort Drane, General Armistead is placed in command of that part of the territory north of the Withlacoochee and east of the St. John's. Jumper, Alligator and several of the Indians visited General J. Many of the Indians went on board the steamboat. Wrote to the Adjutant General. Wrote home. APL 25. Directed Lieutenant Carey to take charge of the money sent by Lieutenant Lurrell and pay for the cattle which he has received from the Seminole Indians. Tuskanuggee Harjo applied to have his relations with Concharto Miko sent to Arkansas. Promised to write to Governor Call on the subject. 26. Lieutenant Lurrell arrived with my public papers from Fort Mitchell. Ordered him to pay the Indians for their cattle. Instructed Lieutenant Call in relation to the treatment of Indians in his neighborhood. Directed that the latitude of Fort Mellon be taken. Also that the remains of Captain Miller be removed to consecrated ground. Wrote to Governor Call on the subject of the removal of Concharty Miko's people. Wrote to General Hernandez, to Lieutenant Colonel Brown, and Major Cross. 27. The Indians are slowly coming in. Micanopy, Jumper, Alligator and others visited GLJ. Today they were drunk and incapable of business. Wrote to General Hernandez on the subject of Captain Drain's claim to the command of St. Augustine. Also to Lieutenant Colonel Crane. In relation to men said to have been detained by General Hernandez. Wrote to Judge Smith in relation to the Negroes of the citizens of Florida among the Indians. 28. Micanopy, Jumper, Alligator, and others came in and met GNLJ in council. It was settled that the Indians should be enrolled tomorrow. Micanopy was informed that the Indians who should remain out would be held accountable for all the property destroyed during the war. April 29th. The agent and assistant went out today to enroll the Indians. 7. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket. Returned from Volusia and reported that he had seen 2 large trails of Indians who recently crossed the road. One, longer than the other, he supposed had been made by the women and children. The other, smaller and more recent, was made by men. He and his companion followed them, came up with them unperceived, and supposes there were 250 of them. They carried large packs, were almost naked, and some of them were without guns. Also stated that the surveying party under Captain Lee had found 2 Indian families almost in a state of nudity. They were subsisting on alligators. The party advised them to join Micanopy. Cujo informed GL.J that his son had arrived, that he had seen Powell but a few days ago, that he was coming in. Sent Major Cross a check of Major Forsyth on the Manhattan Company for $200 and a draft on Dr. John Creighton of Louisville, Kentucky for $450 to take up a bond held by W. Bowie, trustee of the heirs of French, being for a payment on account of a farm on the heights of Georgetown, District of Columbia. The agent and assistant came in tonight with the roll. There are only 145 Indians, 68 of them are warriors. 30. Tustanuck Harjo called to say that a Hitchiti Indian had visited John Hoponi and informed him that he had left Powell but a few days before, that he was coming in, but he had heard a report that it was the intention of General J. to seize and execute him, in consequence of which he had fallen back to the St. John's to wait further information. Major Graham came into camp. He had seen John Hoponi and confirmed the statement of Tustanuck Harjo. May 1st. Jumper and Abraham came in with a message from Micanopy. He sent word that John Kowaya had stolen 5 of our horses and had run away with all his people, and that Alligator had gone in pursuit of him. Jumper informed General J that his life and that of his son had been threatened by the Indians. John Hoponi came in and gave an account of the statements of the Hitchiti Indian who had visited him. He stated that Powell had gone towards the St. John's to join Coy Harjo, in consequence of false reports having reached him from Tampa Bay of the intentions of General J to execute him and a portion of his followers. Richard A. Guard, taken by the Indians at Dade, returned May 2nd. Where a Negro came in today with his family. He reports that the Indians are greatly alarmed. Abraham came in. He reported that Micanopy would send an armed force if necessary to take the horse. Thieves. Jim Boy and Tustanuck Harjo came in today. The latter informed General J that he was about to have a dance at his camp. The dances of the Indians appears to be one of their religious ceremonies, the fast the whole of the day preceding. And take medicine. The ceremony seems to be of very ancient origin. It is altogether what they call a purification. Thalothlo Harjo came in today from Fort Dade. May 3rd. This day 29 years ago General J was appointed by Mr. Jefferson a second lieutenant in the 7th Rect of Infantry in the Army of the United States. Lewis. A Negro taken by the Indians at Dade's battle came in this morning. He informed General J that Powell had been on his way to join Micanopy with 4 of 500 men, women and children. but that he had heard a report of the intention of General J to execute him and that he had changed the direction of his march and had gone south. The emigration of the Indians will be tedious and difficult if not impracticable. The policy of moving them from the country is doubtful. There is no population pressing upon them. And until that be the case, whatsoever arrangements may be made with the chiefs, the great body of the heard a report of the intention of General J to execute him and that he had changed the direction of his march and had gone south. The emigration of the Indians will be tedious and difficult if not impracticable. The policy of moving them from the country is doubtful. There is no population pressing upon them. And until that be the case, whatsoever arrangements may be made with the chiefs, the great body of the Indians cannot be made sensible of the necessity or justice of removing them from a country so well adapted to their condition. Fourth, opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket, came to see General J. Today he says Micanopy's slaves will all be in and will accompany him to the west. Wrote to General Macomb on the subject of the campaign. Wrote to W. Gould of Lieutenant Creighton on the subject of Negroes in the possession of Indians. Case. Did not the treaty at Payne's Landing absolve the Indians from all obligations to restore slaves and other property taken from citizens previously? The Gov. $7,000 as the amount to be paid for spoliations, and by that act it took the place of the Indians as regards claimants. May 5th. No information from the Seminoles. The emigration is becoming hopeless. Alligator has not returned, and perhaps will not. Jim Boy called to say that. Echo Harjo proposed to visit Powell, who is his relation, and bring him in. Sent out for him, authorized him to go. He will set off in the morning. George, a nephew of Cloud, came in. One of his sisters is a prisoner. He has been long anxious to obtain her release with that of her children. General J. permitted him to take them out of the pickets today. He is to have charge of them and they are to report to the Inspector General twice a week. Informed General J. that Cooley had said to the Seminoles that there was an island near the place where he formerly resided, to which if they would retire General J. would not be able to follow them, and they could then remain in the country. By the way, Cooley was over in the Georgia penitentiary for stealing Negroes. He is a cunning knave, and seems to be a kind of head man in Florida. He is keeper of the lighthouse near Cape Florida, lost his family by the Indians, and was employed by Lieutenant Powell when he explored the Everglades. As a pilot, May 6, Echo Harjo called with McQueen to would not be able to follow them, and they could then remain in the country. By the way, Cooley was over in the Georgia penitentiary for stealing Negroes. He is a cunning knave, and seems to be a kind of head man in Florida. He is keeper of the lighthouse near Cape Florida, lost his family by the Indians, and was employed by Lieutenant Powell when he explored the Everglades. As a pilot, May 6, Echo Harjo called with McQueen to receive his final instructions. He was furnished with tobacco for presents and with horses to carry them. John Kowaya's sister, a prisoner, applied to be permitted to leave the pickets, but her request was refused in consequence of the bad conduct of her relations. John Hoponi applied for permission for a part of Charlie Emathla's family to go to their former residence to look for property which they had left. They are permitted to go accompanied by Yoholo Harjo. Yarja and Noka Harjo visited J. Today they report their men to be very sickly. 7. Wrecked dispatches from Lieutenant Colonel Harney, announcing the arrival at Fort Mellon of Powell and Hicks. The chiefs assembled had had a council which resulted favorably. They were to be ready to depart in a week from the 4th instat. Past Midshipman W. Glocklin relieved from duty and ordered to Washington. May 8th. Georgia and other chiefs called on business. They were curious to know when they could be allowed to retire to their homes. Captain Page came in from Micanopy's camp. No news from Halatucci. The messenger from Fort Mellon reports that Sam Jones had been in and would come on down to Tampa. 9. Directed that the garrison and stores be withdrawn from Fort Clinch. Part of the subsistence be taken to Fort King, the remainder, with all property except ordnance stores, to be brought to this place. The ordnance stores to go to Mount Vernon Arsenal. Jim Boy and Antonio expressed a desire to see General J tomorrow on business, and the general assented and appointed 10 o'clock a.m. to see them. 10. Micanopy, Jumper and other chiefs came in. The spoke of the delay of their people. General J informed them that a party must move by the 20th instant, that Cloud's people should go, and Antonios, if they could be gotten ready, they reported to be in on the 12th within. Jumper and Antonio, both drunk, sent Lieutenant Crossman with a boat and 4 vessels to the mouth of Withlacoochee to remand the stores. Arranged with Captain Crabb to send the U-State steamer to Pensacola for repairs. General JRECD letters from his family. 11. John Hoponi came in on business. He had conversed with Jumper and Cloud's nephew. The latter proposed to accompany the party that should first depart, leave it at Mobile Point, and return for others. Allowed John Hoponi to send out for some Creek families. Wrote to General Macomb in relation to the staff of the Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina volunteers. Wrote to the Surgeon General in relation to the want of medical assistance. Gave order that the sutlers should not deal with Indian Negroes except by the permission of the Indian agent or assistant, and that the prisoners must have the permission of the Inspector General or the Provost Marshal. May 12th. Sent off a number of broken-down horses, about 200 RECD dispatches from Fort Mellon. General Armistead had arrived there. The Indians had gone out to collect some of their scattered people, and the Negroes captured during the war. Information had been received that some of them had been taken and would be soon delivered at Fort Mellon. Expected the Seminole chiefs today. They have not come. No reliance to be placed on the Micanopy, Jumper, and several chiefs came in. They had heard from Halatucci and Alligator. The former had been ordered to come in without delay, and the latter was ordered to be in by the 20th. The Negroes are also positively ordered in. The arrangement is that a party is to be sent off on the 20th. Colonel Henderson came in, May 13th, ordered that the naval garrison be withdrawn. The Marine Corps is to relieve it. Colonel Henderson charged with the military arrangements necessary to carry the order into effect. May 14th, information received by Lieutenant Cochran of the Indians planting potatoes and repairing their huts. Major Thompson ordered to send a detachment to destroy the crops, burn the houses, and capture or drive out the Indians or Negroes. Also to kill the horses and cattle. Wrecked by 2 Miccosukes. Lieutenant Colonel Harney, the original of a communication of the 4th instant, a duplicate of which was RECD on the 7th by 2 Creek Indians. There is the same difference in all the acts of the 2 people. The Creeks will do as much in a week as the Seminoles in a month. 15. Micanopy came in today. He expresses himself out of patience with his people in sequence of their delay in coming in the campaign. It is to be feared as a failure. The Seminoles will not come in without the application of force, and it is now too late in the season to operate in this country. 2 of Jim Boy's Indians who had accompanied Lieutenant Bainbridge came in with dispatches. They reported that they had seen an Indian who accompanied Colonel Lane as a guide, and escaped from him in October. He informed them that he would come in if the other Indians should come. But if any remained out, he would stay out also. 16. John Hoponi came to inform General J that he had received information from Indians that whiskey had been sold or given to the Seminoles near Fort Mellon, and that injurious consequences had resulted from it. He also stated that a good deal of drinking was going on in Micanopy's camp. Dispatched the Miccosukes, who brought letters from Fort Mellon with a letter to Lieutenant Colonel Harney. Sent dispatches to General Armistead and Lieutenant Colonel Harney via Volusia. May 17th. Wrecked letters from home. Wrote to the Ceci of War, General Macomb, and his adjutant general. Saw Lieutenant Colonel Caulfield in relation to service in the Creek country. Saw the ASTQ master in relation to the transportation of the Alabama volunteers in the steamboat Merchant to Apalachicola. 18. Colonel Henderson came in today and relieved Captain Crabb. The captain proceeds with his command, in the steamboat Merchant, to his ship. Echo Harjo and McQueen, who went on the 6th to Burl in Coy Harjo, came in and reported this morning. They proceeded by the trail to Hitchapuxasa, crossed that place half a day's journey, and were informed by Indians whom they met that it would be necessary to go around the cypress hammock. They did so and came up with Powell near the St. John's in 4 days. The Indian who was to have acted as a guide from Micanopy's camp failed to accompany them. They spent 4 days at Powell's camp, saw Coy Harjo, Coacucci, and Sam Jones there. They and Powell remained. Echo Harjo to inform General Jesup that they had with great difficulty collected the body of the nation, but that some of their people were still out. They would collect them as soon as possible and move into Tampa and go immediately off, that their faces were turned to the west and they would not change the direction they had taken. Coy Harjo declared it to be his wish to the country assigned to him as soon as possible. He had visited it and was pleased with it. Powell desired him to inform General J that he rejoiced at the return of peace. He had great difficulty in finding his people and collecting them together. He had been delayed but would be sure to come in. He has great difficulty in consequence of sinister reports from Tampa Bay. He says the Seminoles, and particularly the Miccosukes, are like a gang of wild hogs. You fire at them and they scatter. With some difficulty they are reassembled. Approach them, they scatter again, and you have to take hogs away them. And it will then be a long time before you can tame them so as to drive them. The Indians had been scattered by the troops on peace being made by the chiefs. Most of them were collected. The reports from Tampa were like shots and scattered them again. They have collected most of them and are taming them. But some time must elapse before they can be perfectly reassured. Jim Boy applied to be allowed to go to Captain Burns' rancho for the purpose of bringing away a relation of old Moniac. May 19th. Yoholo Harjo, who had been out to Homosassa, returned this morning and reported that he had, according to the orders of General J, examined the whole of that section of country and that there were no Indians, and no signs of any. He found a horse and their ponies which he brought in. Lieutenant Bainbridge reported his return from a survey of the route to Camp Izard and thence to Fort Dade. Distance to Fort Izard is 81 miles. Thence to Fort Dade, miles. A Creek Indian who had left the regiment that winter found and brought in. Jumper came in. He informed General J that a portion of the Seminoles were very sickly and that many of them had died, among them several chiefs. May 20th. An express has arrived from General Armistead and Lieutenant Colonel Harney. The Seminoles had not come in, nor had they delivered any Negroes. General Armistead had sent 2 officers of his staff, with 2 Indian chiefs, to communicate with Powell. The general believes from information received from the Indians that many persons here are interested in preventing the Indians from coming in. Lieutenant Call H thinks that General A. has committed an error by sending out. May 21st. Additional dispatches from General Armistead and Lieutenant Colonel Harney. Coy Harjo had been in. Powell had moved forward towards Tampa. Coy Harjo would remove in about a week. Wrecked. A message from Halatucci. He promises to be in with all his people in 13 days. An Alabama chief came in from Cape Florida. He reports that all the people in that quarter are moving and will be in with Halatucci. He told a story of a snake as large as a Micanopy and Jumper came in. They have heard from Alligator. He promised to join in 3 days. Wrote to Governor Call, to General Armistead and to the adjutant General, to whom copies of a part of the correspondence in relation to the Creek campaign was forwarded. May 22nd. Micanopy stayed last night at headquarters with his wife. He breakfasted and dined with General J. Captain Page called and reported that Alligator had sent in 5 broken days, and that he would be in 5 days. Lieutenant Colonel Caulfield called and took leave. He was authorized to change his route on his arrival at Noonanville. Colonel Henderson ordered to Washington. With Dr. Carney, Captain Howell, and LTs Stark and Long. 23rd. A member of the Pease Creek Indians have come in with 17 Negroes. Captain Cross men returned from Fort Clinch with part of the stores from that depot. No Indians had been seen there for several months past, and no signs of any. May 24th. J determined to hold the Apalachicola Indians accountable for any outrages committed by the fugitive Creeks and wrote to Gov. Call requesting him to cause such information to be given to the Indians. Wrecked. Dispatches from Lieutenant Colonel Harney. He had been informed by a Seminole that there were many Negroes on the St. John's above Fort Mellon. Lieutenant Payton has been dispatched to explore the river towards its source. The country about Fort Mellon represented to be sandy, covered with pines, and dotted with small cypress swamps and live oak hammocks. May 25th. Jim Boy came with 4 of his men, who are going out to communicate with Creeks who came to Florida last summer, and invite them to come in. General J gave them their instructions, and they departed. Captain Page came in from Micanopy's camp, and reported that a runner had came to that chief with information that Coacucci and Alligator with a large party would be in tomorrow or next day. May 26th. John Hoponi and Tustenuji Harjo came in today and reported that whiskey or gin had been taken into the Seminole camp. And many of their people had been made drunk. They said their people thought it hard that the Seminoles should have whiskey to drink and the Creeks should be denied. Promised to investigate the matter. Ascertained that Bunny took the Indian families away without the consent or even knowledge of the agent. Wrecked information that Powell could not succeed in obtaining the consent of the Miccosukes to emigrate, and that they would probably become hostile. May 27th. Alligator's broken days expired yesterday. Nothing has been heard from him. He is evidently trifling and no doubt intends to remain out and perhaps become hostile. Gave orders to the different forts to be on the alert. The steamer Izard arrived today. Governor Call was on board, also Lieutenant Vinton, Colonel Fitzpatrick, W. Hawkins, Dr. Randolph. The boat was commanded by E.J. Wood, who brought it hither to deliver it to the U States. Wrecked a letter from General Reed, with a present of champagne. Call. Wood brought J. some ice. Major Graham called to inform General J of the arrival of part of Alligator's band. May 28th. Wrecked. Dispatches from Colonel Harney from Fort Mellon. A party of Negroes had surrendered who give information that Micanopy has been disposed, and that Abiaka is now the principal chief of the nation, that the Indians had resolved not to emigrate, and would fight if the attempt was made to force them off. Communicated the information to Governor Call, and made a requisition on him for 300 mounted men. Sent dispatches to General Armistead, Major Nelson, Major Whiting, Major Childs. Major Thompson required a sentinel at my quarters for the first time during the war. May 29th. Governor Call took leave of General J last night. They conversed until a late hour. Major Vinton called last night for final instructions. He is to go to Pensacola to conduct the operations of the Q Masters Department west of Apalachicola. The steamboat grounded last night and the governor is necessarily detained. Nothing heard from Alligator, nor from the principal part of his band. The governor asked for cartridges, rifle powder, and flints. General J promised to furnish him. May 30th. The governor called early this morning, breakfasted with General J, discussed with him a plan for the defense of the frontier during the summer. General J made a requisition on him for troops to be stationed west of the Sewanee. He promised to make every effort to sustain General J and to furnish all the troops he should find necessary. He departed about 10 o'clock on his return home.